Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
This is Lindsay Smith Rogers. Today, guest host Shelley Hearn, director of the Lerner Center for Public Health Advocacy, speaks to Antha Williams, who leads the environment program at Bloomberg Philanthropies. Under Williams' direction, Bloomberg Philanthropies supports environmental initiatives to improve the sustainability of cities around the world, accelerate the transition to clean energy, combat overfishing and protect coral reefs, and help businesses and investors better understand climate-related financial risks and opportunities. They discuss how Bloomberg Philanthropies is using data, storytelling, and grassroots campaigns to fight climate change and protect public health. Let's listen.
Antha Williams, as the leader of the Bloomberg Philanthropies Environment Program, you, my dear, have a lot on your plate. I think, let's see if I have enough fingers here. Addressing sustainability for cities around the globe, ocean protection, accelerating transitions to clean energy, and then there's that really thorny one, climate change. I love your work. And we're going to dive right into it because you all are not doing these long, drawn out navel-gazing exercises. You are burrowing in on the facts. You're finding pragmatic, big, hairy, audacious ideas that actually work, that move the needle on some of the most toughest intractable problems. So we got to get a little of the inside skinny. We're going to open up the hood here. And the first place I want to start, one, hi, Antha, how you doing? I never gave you a moment there.
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm such an admirer of your work and expertise, Shelley, that it's just a real treat and pleasure to get to talk to you about our work, our joint mission in the world.
Antha, this is what's fun about the podcast. We all learn together. It's not just you and me in kind of the back and forth of our work, but by opening this up, letting people listen. And really, I do thank you for sharing the thinking and some of the lessons that you've learned in this work. And it's where I want to focus in first on. I was going to start using mining, digging, burrowing in metaphors here. Beyond Coal campaign. It's a really interesting one. It had a huge impact, and there's a lot to learn that we can build upon. Can you give listeners, because not everyone knows that initiative, what was it about? What happened as a result? And I really want to get your takeaways.
Well, thank you so much for asking. Mike really comes to all of our environmental and climate work from the perspective of what is going to save lives and improve livelihoods. And so when he was 3-term mayor of New York, he experienced that he could do incredibly ambitious things to cut climate emissions and work to tackle air pollution, like cleaning up the most polluting heating oils in buildings, making massive investments in transit over, car ridership, doing everything he could as mayor to advance the agenda. And no matter what, there was still going to be pollution from coal-fired power plants blowing in from across state lines because climate and air pollution don't respect political borders. It doesn't work that way. And so he was looking for really bold ideas about what he could do with Bloomberg Philanthropies. And the Sierra Club's approach to say, forget about the politics in Washington, D.C., we can take these fights to the local level, and through really smart campaigning and organizing and litigation and policy advocacy, we can actually defeat these old polluting facilities in favor of clean energy. This was at a really important time. It was 2011, and the cap and trade legislation had just withered on the vine in the US Senate in a really heartbreaking way. But the idea that sitting mayor and global philanthropist would put his name and money and time behind the Sierra Club to take on these pretty edgy fights was really significant. And so I think some of the early successes of that campaign and lessons that we've taken to our other work are, one, just the importance of bringing the data to that fight. The Sierra Club, the campaign at that time was led by Bruce Nellis. He remains a really close partner and a brilliant campaigner. And he had set up some of the groundbreaking legal and organizing work to take down these coal plants and ensure that they're replaced by clean energy. But he didn't yet have the comprehensive data on every single coal boiler across the country and what was the status of its pollution controls and, what was the situation of the community around it? Was it close to, schools and churches and all of that? And so the first phase of our work together was really around just getting that data. And that really became a campaigning roadmap. And now that we've expanded that work, we're doing energy transition work, from those original investments in the Sierra Club to now 32 countries plus the EU, where we're very deeply involved in transitioning the power sector, or in a lot of cases, creating the clean energy opportunities in economies where they really lack the power that they need for all productive uses to grow their economies and provide for growing populations. And so that data has been really, I think, fundamental to the coal fight. The other lesson, though, was just the importance of putting a real big name and mark behind the ambition of the coal campaign. At the time, coal was the leading source of climate pollution in the US. Globally, it's still the leading source of climate pollution. And yet, in the context of most climate conversations and even up to the global, UN talks, it was kind of a dirty, it was kind of a dirty word to say, we've just got to close coal. The climate can't afford it. And putting Mike's name and attention behind the idea that we're not going to solve climate change if we don't get off of coal was really pretty important at the time. And in a lot of the geographies where we work, we find that it remains really important. And those campaigners, the cool thing now is that I remember the first time we brought the US coal campaigners to London to meet with the nascent European Beyond Coal campaign, and just the lessons learned, the knowledge exchange, and the motivation that comes from being part of something bigger than just one community-based fight or one country-based fight is really significant. And I think we can't underestimate that.
So there are a lot of great points in there. I heard you took this local at a time where there was just so much national attention, but you had the building blocks by going local. You brought in the credibility, the name recognition of the mayor, and I gotta do a little sidebar. My favorite line of the good mayor is, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And that's another point that you're making. I think it enhances and is part of the credibility. Having good evidence is really critical, but it's not enough. You've combined the attention that you can bring in with Bloomberg, the focusing in on with bringing a series of hard-hitting tactics at the local level, and good evidence-driven basis. So important insights. Help us now. Let's fast forward. Here we are today. And I put this as a huge climate event that took place. It's an environmental tragedy. And it was no accident, but the train derailment in East Palestine, we see these happening all the time, these derailments with extraordinarily hazardous materials. And these are materials that are used to make plastics, which are part of the next stage climate challenges. These are not separate incidents. These are all part of contributing to undermining the environment. So I got to imagine, knowing you Bloombergians, you are thinking, all right, what does the data tell us? What are some of the local opportunities? And where, if you brought in the muscle and big picture connecting the dots, what are you guys thinking? How are you engaging with this event? How does that fit into some of your next step equations on helping address the climate change problems?
I'm so glad that you asked about the East Palestine train derailment. And I think, sadly, what happened in East Palestine wasn't a surprise to us, nor would it be a surprise to the many thousands of people who live in places like Louisiana's Cancer Alley and all across Appalachia, who have experienced firsthand the really devastating health impacts that come with living in close proximity to petrochemical plants. I think just a note on the plants themselves, these are facilities that typically utilize fossil fuels to make plastics or the components of plastics. And just as a coal plant emits the carbon emissions and the particulate matter that causes respiratory disease and illness, these plants emit the carbon pollution, but the toxic chemicals that are endocrine disruptors that cause birth defects and cancers and can be very devastating. And in our work with the neighborhood and community-based groups that are working to stop these plants, stop new plants from getting built, there's almost no one who doesn't have close family and friends who are either living with or dying of cancer or other very serious health problems that can be attributed to these facilities. So when the East Palestine derailment and toxic event was underway, the first thing that we did was supported the people who are working with us to be able to go there and meet with the community to understand their needs and to offer help where they could. I think the other thing which was really significant, and back to the point of bringing the data, was to actually just map out where all of the train derailments of this type have happened in the last 5 years. And it was kind of shocking to see that the map was all over the United States. And it really challenges the idea of what is a frontline community. When we talk about environmental justice and we talk about the frontline communities that are dealing with toxic pollution in their neighborhoods, sometimes it can be easy for people to say, well, those facilities have to happen somewhere and it's not in my neighborhood. But the people in East Palestine weren't a frontline community until they were. And I think the fact that those types of derailments have happened so frequently and over such a broad area just demonstrates that we need better protection for communities, and that public health and the climate can't afford an expansion of this sector. It's the wrong time to be doing it. It's the wrong solution to the problem. And we have an awful lot of facilities that produce these products now. We don't need to be dramatically expanding that at the exact time that we're learning that we need to be phasing down climate polluting fossil fuels and moving away from toxics, not toward them.
Hallelujah. But Antha, what I am so surprised by is when we're having these conversations with this event and the policy solutions that are being put out there by many of the policymakers are really tiny little steps that aren't actually getting at the fundamental of what you're talking about, that these extraordinarily hazardous materials are running it through our backyards when we don't even know it. They're in our communities and our products. And the debates I hear are people talking about, well, we need better inspection on trains and things that are really just the basics that, of course, you should have in train safety. But that's not what we're talking about. We're trying, how do we reduce our reliance use of these materials so we're not at risk in the first place? It's basic public health concept of prevention.
That's right.
You are putting that out there. I appreciate that, but it's not what's being discussed. So what do you say to us who are being small-minded when you've been successful with the big, hairy ideas that are needed and make a difference? What do we need to do here?
Well, I think the first thing is that, individual people need to be engaged and to be demanding from their elected officials more of what we want to see and less of what we don't want to see. The decisions about whether to build these kind of facilities, whether to move this kind of material, happen often at the local level. So it is certain that more protective environmental and health policy out of Congress would be a really good thing. I think the politics are such that we're unlikely to get that, and certainly unlikely to get anywhere close to what we need. We're speaking in a week when the most recent IPCC report, the final in the series, came out, and it just shows that without extremely bold action, we are not on track to stay within the limits of 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And the material difference for the planet between 1.5 degrees and 2 is huge. It's the existence of coral reefs in this world is the difference between those two things. And to your earlier point, about prevention, one of the initial ways that this petrochemicals problem was coming to us was many of our groups that are working to create marine protected areas and protect the world's oceans were just seeing the plastics problem get worse and worse and worse. And many of the mayors, especially mayors in coastal cities with rivers going out into the ocean, were seeing their plastic waste management problem getting more and more challenging. But you can't just treat that problem. You can't just treat the symptoms of that problem. And if you follow the chain all the way to the top of the problem of plastic pollution and all the throwaway stuff that we make, almost all of the plastics that we use, including for these throwaway items, are made from fossil fuels. And those are made in communities across Texas and Louisiana and Appalachia, and there's a massive expansion proposed. And so, we're going to be confronting that problem at every step along its life cycle if we don't do everything we can to stop the expansion of the facilities and make sure that we're just buying time, while the public demand builds, while the markets catch up to the need for much more healthy alternatives to a lot of the throwaway plastics that we're using now.
The good news is I think people are across the board starting to pay attention, but as you note, it's going to take a while. And so it's great that you're pushing out there to advance some of the stops and the stopgap measures. And once again, I gotta give you a shout out on connecting the dots, because the climate changes that are being discussed are going to be impacting our oceans, are going to be impacting human lives, and that these are where many can get paralyzed and saying this is too complex and too overwhelming, and what can I do? There are pieces that make a difference. And I really appreciate what Bloomberg is doing to help connect those and push them along. Now, what also gives me hope is you've hired the Reverend Yearwood, the lead on the Hip Hop Caucus. Now, back to getting in, big names that people will pay attention to. You're covering the bases here.
Rev is an amazing leader. And what's amazing about Rev Yearwood and his work at Hip Hop Caucus is he's really about storytelling and about winning people's hearts and motivating them to feel hopeful and inspired and feel like there's something we can do. And so he's been really instrumental in the leadership of this work on coal, certainly, but also now on beyond petrochemicals. But he was with us at the climate, the UN climate talks in Glasgow, and when we were there together, he was just remarking, it's really powerful that we're increasingly working to bring together not just the climate data and not the climate experts or even the campaigners who are working on this stuff every day in their own backyard for their health and for their kids' health, but other culture makers as well. And in Glasgow, we did this really cool partnership with a Scottish artist named Gabriella Marcella, who did this piece called Waterworks. And we put it in different areas where the streets were closed to cars and the street was painted, and it was just eye-catching, and it created a space where people could gather and talk and be engaged. And it, was brought inside the UN pavilions, but was also outside on the streets. And, electric buses were wrapped in it. And it was just, I think, a cool example of some of the things we can do to be a bit more creative, to bring storytelling, and it just makes you think, and it makes you think in a different way about the mission that we all need to be on together.
With that, let me thank you for bringing together the data and the storytelling. It's a powerful combination. We know and see evidence, but we have to, in order to put it into action, have to do that translation. And you're doing that in many different ways. We need that. Good luck, and thank you for the insights.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Shelley. It's super fun to talk to you about this. And I'm such an admirer of your work to bring your public health expertise and data and advocacy so that we're really getting elected leaders to do what they need to do to move us in the right direction. So I'm super grateful for everything you do.
It's going to take all of us. So thank you, Antha.
Thank you.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Philip Porter, Spencer Greer, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Fernandez and Shian Briscoe. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.